Good day to everyone. My name is Fritz Nolasco from IELTS People's Academy, and I'd like to first and foremost welcome you to this online review. And for this afternoon, I'd like to discuss something about grammar. Now, when people think about grammar, they think about parts of speech, things that you have learned from when you were in elementary or even high school, nouns, pronouns, verbs, and all those different parts of speech. Now, ultimately, grammar has something to do with how you put these parts of speech together in order to form a sentence, and for the sentence to come together to form a paragraph, and ultimately to form an essay out of these 3 or 4 paragraphs, which is quite similar to what you'll be doing in your IELTS writing task 2 essay part. Now, of course, grammar doesn't only have to do with writing, but it's equally relevant when it comes to speaking, the speaking test of the IELTS, and as well as the listening test and reading test of the IELTS exam. Now, for this afternoon, I'd like to share with you a short lesson on verbs. Now, I'm quite sure that everyone is familiar with what verb is, so let's start first with just a brief definition of what verb is. Verb is an action word, of course. Words such as read, listen, or to teach, and to study, and to work are just a few of the examples of verbs that we use in our sentences. Now, with regard to verbs, I'd like to share with you the 2 types of verbs that are commonly used. Okay, so the first type of verb is called auxiliary verb. Now, from the word itself, auxiliary, this supposes that this action word is merely acts as a support. Now, some people call it linking verb, some people would call it supporting verb, but secondary verb as well for some other books. But the idea, yes, it acts as a support. Now, the word support supposes that you also have another type of verb, which is called, of course, the main verb, which I'd like to discuss with you later. Alright, I'd like to start first with auxiliary verb, and I'd like to introduce to you 3 types of auxiliary verb. So, letter A is what we call the verb be, and the letter B is what we call the verb have, and last but not the least is letter C, which we call modals. Think of these different types of auxiliary verb as more of like families. We start off with letter A, B, and for the verb be, we can categorize them into 3 tenses. For the present tense, you have the words am, is, and are. Now, the difference among the 3 is that am is usually used for the subject I, as in I am, and is used for subjects if you pertain to singular, say for example, Ian is. And finally, you have the word are, which is meant for plural, if I say, for example, the people are. Now, for future tense, we make use of the will and shall. So, for example, I say, I will be, and you have the words officials shall be. Now, moving on to the second family of the auxiliary verb, I introduced the verb have. And for the present tense, it has 2 versions. If your subject is I, pertaining to yourself, of course, you usually make use of have for I have. If the subject is singular, say for example Ian, we make use of has, and if it's plural subject, we make use of have, as in students have. Now, when it comes to the past tense, keep in mind that regardless whether your subject is singular or plural, you make use of had, as in I had, she had, they had. Finally, for future tense, we make use of 2 modals again, will and shall, combined together with the verb have. Okay, for the third part of the auxiliary verb, I'd like to discuss something about modals, and I'd like to think about them as a modal family which has 9 offsprings all in all. Now, we already had encountered the first two modals earlier when we were talking about the future tense, which of course include words such as will and shall. And apart from these two, you also have other modals like should, could, would. You have the word may. You have the might, must, and can.
Now, when it comes to the main verb, we have 5 categories all in all. First one is called the present participle. And you can easily tell that it's a present participle because of the suffix ing at the end. Example, driving, writing, walking. Letter B on one hand is what we call the past participle, and this is quite difficult to figure out because sometimes it ends with en, at certain times it ends with ed. For example, driven, written, and walked with an ed. Letter C is called the base form, and from the term itself, base form, it serves as the origin of all the other words, present participle or past participle. So it basically serves as a root word. So the root word for driven and driving would be the word drive. For writing and written would be the base form is write. And for walking and walked, the base form is walk. Now for the fourth one, letter D, simple present, has 2 versions in it. So this is the drive with no S, and the other is with drives with S. Now just keep in mind, don't get confused, that you apply the one with no S, as in the word drive, if the subject is plural, as in they drive. And finally, you have the word drives with S, that is, if your subject is singular, say for example, he drives. Last but not the least is letter E, simple past. And for simple past, you make use of the word drove, as in drove. And you have the word write for wrote, and of course, walk, same thing also, walked. And now that we have talked about for both auxiliary verbs and main verbs, now I'd like to match them together. Just keep in mind that A, as in the A, B, is always added together with the A present participle. So that makes the formula A plus A. Same thing also that B for the word have always combines with B past participle. So the formula B plus B. Next, C, which is your modals, would always combine together with base form, letter C. So that makes it C plus C. And for the last two, letter D, simple present, from the word itself simple, doesn't need any auxiliary verb, so it's just solo, as in D. And last but not the least, you have simple past, which of course is also solo because it's simple, then it just makes it letter E alone. So there you have it. You have 5 formula: A plus A, B plus B, C plus C, D, and E. Just keep in mind that these 5 formula are applicable if the subject is the one doing or performing the action. To illustrate this point, let's see some examples. A plus A, as in the officer is writing a letter. B plus B, as in the officer has written a letter, which is also correct. Or you can choose C plus C, as in the officer can write a letter. And last one, D, the officer writes a letter, so pay attention to the S if the subject is singular. And if the subject is plural, as in the officers, then you remove the S for the write, as in the officers write a letter. And the last part, which is letter E, is the officer wrote a letter. So try to avoid common mistakes when it comes to verb combinations. Some people would not follow the formula mentioned earlier, and for some, they follow these common mistakes, such as A plus D. Doesn't make sense to make use of A plus D, because if we say A plus D, that means are runs, which is supposed to be A plus A, which is are running, or when you use the word D, you make use of run or runs. Or another mistake is adding D together with C. So what comes out would be the has moved. Doesn't make sense as well. It's wrong. So instead of the B plus C, you can change it into B plus B, as in has moved with a D. And you can also use C plus C, should move, that is. And another example, C plus A, doesn't make sense to say should giving. Instead, you can use C plus C for may give, and A plus A, as in is giving. So always keep in mind that whenever you write your sentences, always follow these 5 formula mentioned. Now, in addition to the 5 formula, let me add another formula, which is the A plus B. Now, if earlier, the 5 formula pertains to subject performing the action, now A plus B supposes that the subject is the one receiving the action. To illustrate, let's put A plus B in a sentence. For example, the officer is written a letter, which is, of course, officer, the one receiving the written letter. So that's A plus B. As compared to A plus A, which is, of course, the officer is writing a letter. And in this way, the officer is the one performing the action. Now, just a few tips with regard to verb mastery. First one, find out about the different tenses of common verbs. Now, I know that there are a lot of verbs there, but there's no easy way doing these things, but you have to just go over it and try to master and rather familiarize yourself with the different tenses of these verbs, common verbs that are used in your IELTS exam. Second one, try to observe some patterns in your sentences. And third one, always make sure that you follow the formula given. So basically, you just have to keep in mind 6 formula, all in all. Alright, so that wraps up our discussion for this lecture on verbs. And once again, my name is Fritz Velasco, and thank you for listening to this online review. And we hope to see you in class here at IELTS People's Academy. So for further inquiries, you'd like to call us at 497-2285, or you can call us at 496-9703. Thank you for listening from IELTS People's Academy.